and I've been driving 18-wheelers across America for 15 years. In all that time, running every mile of asphalt from Maine to California, I thought I'd seen everything the road could throw at me. Blizzards in Montana, dust storms in Nevada, and enough truck stop coffee to float a battleship. But nothing, and I mean nothing, prepared me for what I found on a scorching Tuesday afternoon at mile marker 267 on Route 66 in New Mexico. I was hauling a load of transmission parts from Albuquerque to Flagstaff, running behind schedule because of a blown tire outside Santa Rosa. The temperature gauge on my Peterbilt was creeping toward the red zone, and I was looking for a place to pull over and let the engine cool down when I saw him. A German Shepherd, sitting perfectly still beside the highway like he was waiting for a bus that would never come. Now, I've seen plenty of stray dogs on the road over the years, and usually I just keep driving. It's a hard truth, but you can't save every lost animal you come across, especially when you're running a tight schedule. But something about this dog was different. He wasn't wandering around or looking lost. He was sitting at attention, staring directly at my truck as I approached, like he'd been expecting me specifically. I pulled over about 50 yards past where the dog was sitting, set my air brakes, and climbed down from the cab. The heat hit me like a physical blow. It had to be at least 110 degrees, and the asphalt was so hot I could feel it through the soles of my boots. The dog hadn't moved. He was still sitting in the exact same position, watching me with intelligent brown eyes that seemed almost human. As I walked toward him, I noticed several things that made my trucker instincts start tingling. First, this wasn't some mangy stray. His coat was clean and well-groomed, and he was wearing a high-quality leather collar with what looked like a small metal tube attached to it. Second, there were no houses, no ranches, no nothing for miles in either direction. How had a well-cared-for dog ended up in the middle of nowhere? And third, this was the detail that really got my attention. There were tire tracks in the dirt beside the highway, recent ones, leading from the road about 10 steps into the desert before they just stopped. "Hey there, boy," I said, crouching down about 6 feet away from him. "What are you doing out here in this heat?" The dog tilted his head slightly but didn't move from his sitting position. That's when I noticed the metal tube on his collar had something inside it. I could see the edge of what looked like rolled-up papers through a small gap in the cap. I've always been curious by nature, which is probably why I became a long-haul trucker in the first place. There's something about the open road that calls to people who want to know what's over the next hill. But this situation was triggering every warning bell in my head. Dogs don't just appear in the middle of the desert wearing mysterious metal tubes, and they definitely don't sit perfectly still in 110-degree heat unless something is seriously wrong. I reached into my truck and grabbed a bottle of water, pouring some into my cupped hands and offering it to the dog. He immediately got up and started drinking, his tail wagging for the first time since I'd seen him. While he drank, I got a better look at the metal tube on his collar. It was definitely designed to hold something, maybe documents or a message. The tube was secured with a small screw cap, and I could see the corner of what looked like official papers sticking out. "Somebody's looking for you, aren't they, boy?" I said, scratching behind his ears. The dog looked up at me with those intelligent eyes, then did something that made my blood run cold. He walked exactly 10 steps toward the desert, stopped, looked back at me, then returned to his original position beside the highway. He repeated this exact sequence 3 times, like he was trying to show me something. I followed his path into the desert, and that's when I found the first clue that this wasn't just a lost pet situation. There, partially hidden under a pile of rocks that had been carefully arranged to look natural, were the remains of what looked like a small campsite. A few charred pieces of wood, some scattered ashes, and most importantly, a business card that had somehow survived the desert wind. The card read, "Theodore Blackwood, Private Investigator, Albuquerque, NM. On the back, someone had written in shaky handwriting, "If you find Winston, call this number immediately, $50,000 reward, no questions asked." Below that was a phone number with a 505 area code, $50,000. I stared at that number until my eyes started watering from the heat shimmer rising off the desert floor. $50,000 would pay off my truck, cover my daughter Sarah's college tuition for the next 2 years, and still leave enough to fix the roof on my house back in Oklahoma. But something about the whole situation felt wrong. Why would someone offer that much money for a dog? And why was the business card hidden at a makeshift campsite in the middle of nowhere? I walked back to Winston, that had to be his name, and found him sitting in the exact same spot, watching me with what I swear looked like expectation in his eyes. "All right, Winston," I said, pulling out my cell phone. "Let's see what this Theodore Blackwood has to say about you." The phone rang 4 times before a woman's voice answered, crisp and professional. "Blackwood Investigations, this is Margaret speaking. How may I help you?" I cleared my throat, suddenly feeling like I was about to step into something much bigger than a simple lost dog case. "Ma'am, I found a German Shepherd out on Route 66, and he's wearing a collar with your business card attached. The card mentions a $50,000 reward." The silence on the other end of the line stretched so long I thought the call had dropped. When Margaret finally spoke, her voice had changed completely. Gone was the professional receptionist tone, replaced by something that sounded like relief mixed with fear. "Sir, where exactly did you find the dog? And please, whatever you do, don't let him out of your sight." "I found him at mile marker 267 on Route 66, about 30 miles east of Albuquerque," I told Margaret, keeping my eyes on Winston, who was still sitting patiently in the blazing sun. "Ma'am, what's so special about this dog that someone would pay $50,000 for him?" Margaret's voice dropped to almost a whisper. "Mr. Williams. Marcus Williams. Mr. Williams, I need you to listen very carefully. Theodore Blackwood died 3 weeks ago of a heart attack. Before he passed, he left very specific instructions about Winston. That dog is carrying something extremely valuable, and there are people who would kill to get their hands on it." My mouth went dry, and it wasn't just from the desert heat. "What kind of valuable are we talking about here?" "The kind that's worth $20 million, Mr. Williams. Theodore was investigating a case involving stolen inheritance money when he died. Winston knows where the evidence is hidden, and without that evidence, a very dangerous man is going to get away with murder." I looked down at Winston, who was now standing and wagging his tail, like he understood every word of our conversation. $20 million. The number was so big it didn't even seem real. "Ma'am, I'm just a truck driver trying to make a living. I don't know anything about investigations or evidence or any of that stuff." "Theodore anticipated this," Margaret said quickly. "He knew that whoever found Winston would be an ordinary person, probably someone traveling Route 66. That's why he left detailed instructions. Mr. Williams, I'm going to ask you to do something that might sound crazy, but I need you to trust me. Can you unscrew the metal tube on Winston's collar?" I knelt down beside Winston and carefully unscrewed the cap on the metal tube. Inside were several rolled-up papers tightly packed to protect them from the elements. I pulled them out and unrolled the first one. It was a letter written in neat handwriting, addressed, "To whoever finds Winston." "Dear friend," the letter began, "if you're reading this, it means I'm dead and Winston has successfully led you to the first clue. My name is Theodore Blackwood, and I've spent the last 6 months of my life gathering evidence against a man named Richard Blackwood, my own nephew, who murdered my brother and stole a $20 million inheritance that rightfully belongs to my brother's daughter, Maria Santos." I stopped reading and looked up at Margaret, who was still on the phone. "This letter says Richard Blackwood murdered someone. Are we talking about going to the police here?" "The police can't help us, Mr. Williams. Richard has connections throughout New Mexico law enforcement. That's why Theodore had to hide the evidence along Route 66 instead of turning it over to the authorities. He needed someone completely outside the system to retrieve it." I continued reading the letter. "The evidence is hidden in 5 locations along Route 66, each one marked by a specific landmark that Winston has been trained to recognize. At each location, you'll find both evidence against Richard and payment for your trouble. But be warned, Richard knows about Winston and will stop at nothing to prevent you from reaching the final cash." The letter included a crude map showing 5 locations between Albuquerque and Flagstaff, each marked with a different symbol. The first location was marked with a picture of an old water tower, and according to the map, it was only about 15 miles ahead on Route 66. "Margaret," I said, my voice shaking slightly, "this letter talks about 5 different locations and says there are people who might try to stop me. What exactly am I getting myself into here? Mr. Williams, I won't lie to you. This is dangerous, but Theodore believed that an ordinary person, someone with no connection to the case, would have the best chance of success. Richard's men are watching the airports, the bus stations, even the major highways. But they're not looking for a truck driver with a legitimate reason to be on Route 66. I walked back to my truck and climbed into the cab, Winston following me and jumping up into the passenger seat like he'd done it 1,000 times before. The air conditioning felt like heaven after standing in the desert heat, and I took a long drink of water while I thought about what Margaret had told me. Let me get this straight. I said into the phone. Theodore Blackwood hid evidence of a murder along Route 66, trained his dog to find the hiding spots, and now you want me to drive around collecting this evidence while someone named Richard tries to stop me? That's essentially correct, yes. But Mr. Williams, there's something else you need to know. Each cache contains $10,000 in cash, along with the evidence. Theodore wanted to make sure that whoever helped him would be properly compensated for the risk. $10,000 at each location, 5 locations total. That was $50,000 plus whatever reward money might be waiting at the end. I looked at Winston, who was sitting in my passenger seat like he owned the place, panting slightly but watching me with those intelligent eyes. Margaret, I need to ask you something, and I want a straight answer. How do I know this isn't some kind of elaborate scam? How do I know you're not just trying to get me to drive around the desert collecting money for you? Because, Mr. Williams, if this was a scam, I wouldn't be telling you about the danger. I'd be making it sound easy and safe. The truth is, 2 other people have already tried to help us and both of them are dead. That stopped me cold. Dead? What do you mean, dead? Theodore hired 2 private investigators before he died, both experienced professionals. The first one, James Morrison, was found shot to death in his car outside Gallup 3 weeks ago. The second one, Linda Hayes, disappeared completely. Her car was found burned out in the desert near Flagstaff, but her body was never recovered. I felt like someone had just dumped a bucket of ice water over my head. And you want me to do the same thing that got 2 professional investigators killed? Mr. Williams, you have something they didn't have. You have Winston, and you have a legitimate reason to be on Route 66. Richard's men are looking for private investigators, not truck drivers. Plus, Theodore specifically trained Winston to work with ordinary people, not professionals. I looked at my delivery schedule. I was supposed to drop my load in Flagstaff by 6 p.m., which gave me about 4 hours. According to Theodore's map, all 5 cache locations were along my route, and the final location was actually in Flagstaff itself. I could potentially collect the evidence and still make my delivery on time. All right, Margaret, I said, making a decision that would change my life forever. I'll do it, but I want you to stay on the phone with me, and if anything goes wrong, you call the FBI immediately. Mr. Williams, thank you. Theodore would be proud. Now the first location is marked by an old water tower with Route 66 painted on the side. Winston will know exactly where to go once you get close. I put the truck in gear and pulled back onto Route 66, Winston sitting alert in the passenger seat like a co-pilot. As we drove, I kept checking my mirrors for any sign that we were being followed, but the highway behind us was empty, except for the heat shimmer rising off the asphalt. Margaret stayed on the line, giving me updates about what to expect at each location. The caches are hidden in waterproof containers, she explained. Theodore buried them about 3 feet deep, always near some kind of permanent landmark. Winston has been trained to find them by scent. Theodore used a specific type of leather oil that the dog can detect even underground. About 10 miles down the road, Winston suddenly stood up and started wagging his tail, looking out the windshield with intense focus. That's when I saw it. An old water tower rising from the desert about a quarter mile off the highway, with faded red letters spelling out Route 66 on its side. The tower looked like it hadn't been used in decades, probably a relic from the highway's heyday in the 1950s and 60s. I pulled off onto a dirt road that led toward the water tower, my truck bouncing and lurching over the rough terrain. Winston was practically vibrating with excitement, whining softly and pawing at the window. When we got within about 50 yards of the tower, he started barking. Not an aggressive bark, but the kind of excited yipping a dog makes when he knows he's about to get a treat. Margaret, we're at the first location, I said into the phone. Winston's definitely excited about something. Good, let him out and follow him. He'll lead you directly to the cache. But Mr. Williams, be careful. Theodore's letter mentioned that Richard might have people watching the locations. I climbed down from the cab and opened the passenger door. Winston immediately jumped out and started running in circles around the base of the water tower, his nose to the ground like a bloodhound. After about 30 seconds, he stopped at a spot near the tower's foundation and started digging frantically with his front paws. I walked over to where Winston was digging and knelt down in the sand. About 6 inches below the surface, my fingers hit something hard and smooth, the top of a plastic container. I dug it out carefully, brushing the sand away to reveal a waterproof storage box about the size of a shoebox. Inside the box, wrapped in plastic bags, were 2 items: A thick manila envelope and a bundle of cash held together with a rubber band. I counted the money quickly. Exactly $10,000 in $100 bills, just like Margaret had promised. The manila envelope contained photographs, bank records, and what looked like copies of legal documents. "Margaret, I found it," I said into the phone. "There's money here, and a bunch of documents with Richard Blackwood's name on them." "Excellent. Those documents prove that Richard has been systematically stealing money from his uncle's estate for the past 2 years. But that's just the beginning. The evidence gets more damning at each location." I was about to ask Margaret about the next location when Winston suddenly stopped wagging his tail and started growling low in his throat. He was looking back toward the highway, his ears pricked forward and his body tense. That's when I heard it, the sound of a car engine getting closer. A black sedan was coming down the dirt road toward us, moving fast and kicking up a cloud of dust. Winston's growling got louder, and every instinct I'd developed in 15 years of trucking told me this wasn't a coincidence. "Margaret," I said urgently, "there's a car coming, and Winston doesn't like it. What do I do?" "Get back to your truck immediately," Margaret said, her voice tight with fear. "Don't let them see the documents, and whatever you do, don't let them get Winston." I stuffed the envelope and money into my jacket and started running toward my truck, Winston right beside me. The black sedan was getting closer, and I could see 2 men in the front seat. I reached my truck just as the sedan pulled up beside it. 2 men got out, both wearing expensive suits that looked completely out of place in the desert heat. The driver was tall and thin with pale skin and cold blue eyes. The passenger was shorter but built like a linebacker, with the kind of scars on his face that suggested he'd been in more than his share of fights. "Afternoon," the tall man said, walking toward me with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Having some truck trouble?" "No trouble," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "Just letting my dog stretch his legs." The man's eyes flicked to Winston, who was standing between me and the 2 strangers, still growling softly. "That's a beautiful German Shepherd," the man said. "Looks like he might be worth some money to the right person. You wouldn't be interested in selling him, would you?" "He's not for sale," I said firmly. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I need to get back on the road." The shorter man stepped forward, and I could see a bulge under his jacket that looked suspiciously like a shoulder holster. "See? That's where you're wrong, friend. That dog belongs to our employer, and we're here to take him home." "I don't know what you're talking about," I said, backing toward my truck. "I found this dog on the highway. If someone's looking for him, they can call animal control." The tall man's fake smile disappeared completely. "Mr. Williams?" "Yes, we know who you are. You're in possession of stolen property. That dog and anything he might have led you to belongs to Mr. Richard Blackwood. Now we can do this the easy way or the hard way, but either way, we're leaving here with the dog." That's when I realized just how deep I was in this mess. These men knew my name, which meant they'd been tracking me somehow. They knew about Winston, and they probably knew about the cash I'd just found. Margaret had been right. This was dangerous, and I was in way over my head. "The easy way," the tall man continued, "is you hand over the dog and anything you might have found, and we let you drive away. The hard way," he nodded to his partner, who opened his jacket just enough to show me the gun in his shoulder holster. "Well, let's just say the desert is a big place, and truck drivers go missing all the time." I looked at Winston, who was still standing protectively beside me, and made a decision that surprised even myself. "You want the dog?" I said, reaching for my truck's door handle. "Come and get him." Then I whistled sharply, and Winston immediately jumped into the cab. I was right behind him, slamming the door and hitting the engine start button in one smooth motion. The 2 men started running toward my truck, but I already had the engine fired up and was throwing it into gear. My Peterbilt might not be fast, but it weighs 80,000 pounds when fully loaded, and there's not much that can stop it once it gets moving. I floored the accelerator and headed straight for the dirt road, leaving the 2 men choking on my dust. "Margaret," I shouted into the phone, which had somehow stayed connected through all the excitement. "They found us. 2 men in a black sedan, and they knew my name." "I was afraid of this," Margaret said grimly. "Richard must have people monitoring police scanners and CB radio frequencies. They probably heard you talking to other truckers about finding Winston." I reached the highway and turned east toward the next cache location, checking my mirrors constantly. The black sedan was following me, staying about a quarter-mile back but definitely keeping pace. "What's the plan now, Margaret? These guys aren't going to just give up and go home." "The next location is about 20 miles ahead. An old trading post called Desert Rose. It's been abandoned for years, but there's still a big neon sign that Winston will recognize. The cache is hidden behind the building, near an old well. And what happens when those guys follow me there? I asked, watching the sedan in my mirror. Theodore anticipated this possibility, Margaret said. At the second location, along with the money and evidence, there's a CB radio programmed with a special frequency. Theodore arranged for help along the route. Other truckers who knew him and agreed to assist if needed. Other truckers. That made sense. The trucking community is tight-knit, and we look out for each other on the road. If Theodore had been smart enough to recruit help from drivers who regularly ran Route 66, then maybe I wasn't as alone as I thought. Winston was sitting in the passenger seat, panting slightly but alert. Every few minutes, he would look back toward the sedan following us, then look at me like he was trying to communicate something important. "What is it, boy?" I asked. "You trying to tell me something?" That's when I noticed something odd. Winston kept looking at the glove compartment of my truck, whining softly and pawing at it. I reached over and opened it, and inside, along with my registration and insurance papers, was something that definitely hadn't been there before. A small electronic device about the size of a matchbox. "Margaret," I said, holding up the device. "I think I know how they've been tracking us. There's some kind of electronic gadget in my glove compartment that wasn't there this morning." "A GPS tracker," Margaret said immediately. "They must have planted it while you were digging up the first cache. Throw it out the window, but wait until you're around a curve so they can't see you do it." I waited until the highway curved around a small hill, then tossed the tracker out the window into the desert. With any luck, Richard's men would follow the signal and end up chasing a piece of electronic equipment instead of my truck. But I wasn't counting on it. These guys seemed too professional to fall for such a simple trick. The Desert Rose trading post appeared on the horizon about 15 minutes later, its broken neon sign still visible against the desert sky. The building looked like it had been abandoned for decades. Broken windows, faded paint, and tumbleweeds piled up against the walls. But Winston immediately perked up when he saw it, standing up in his seat and wagging his tail. I pulled into the parking lot of the abandoned trading post and immediately saw why Theodore had chosen this location. The building provided cover from the highway, and there were multiple escape routes through the desert if things went wrong. More importantly, there was another truck already parked behind the building, a big Kenworth with Oklahoma plates. As I climbed down from my cab, a man emerged from behind the Kenworth. He was about my age, maybe a little older, with the kind of weathered face and confident walk that marked him as a veteran driver. "You must be Marcus," he said, extending his hand. "I'm Eddie Kowalski. Theodore asked me to keep an eye on this location." "Eddie," I said, shaking his hand gratefully. "Am I glad to see you? There are two guys in a black sedan about 10 minutes behind me, and they're not here to help." Eddie nodded grimly. "Theodore warned me about Richard's men. Don't worry, I've got a plan. But first, let's get that cache before they show up." Winston had already jumped down from my truck and was running toward the back of the building, his nose to the ground. Eddie and I followed him to an old stone well that looked like it hadn't been used in 50 years. Winston started digging frantically at the base of the well, and within minutes, I could see the top of another waterproof container. This cache was bigger than the first one, containing not just money and documents but also the CB radio Margaret had mentioned. Eddie helped me dig it out, and we quickly examined the contents. The documents in this cache were even more damning than the first set. Bank records showing that Richard had been systematically draining accounts belonging to his uncle's estate, transferring the money to offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands. "This is enough evidence to put Richard away for 20 years, Eddie said, flipping through the papers. But Theodore was smart to split it up into multiple caches. No single piece of evidence is enough by itself. You need all 5 sets to build a complete case. The CB radio was already programmed with several frequencies, and when Eddie turned it on, we immediately heard voices. Other truckers who were part of Theodore's network, reporting their positions along Route 66. "Breaker 19, this is Moondog eastbound at mile marker 245. Road's clear, no sign of any black sedans." "Copy that, Moondog. This is Silver Fox westbound at 289. I've got eyes on 2 suspicious vehicles heading east. Looks like they're hunting for something." Eddie grabbed the CB microphone. "Silver Fox, this is Big Eddie at Desert Rose. We've got the package, but we're about to have company. Can you run interference?" "Copy that, Big Eddie. I'll slow them down as much as I can. You boys get out of there." Just as Eddie finished talking, I heard the sound of a car engine coming fast down the highway. The black sedan was back, and this time it wasn't alone. There was a second vehicle with it, a white SUV with tinted windows. "Time to go," Eddie said, handing me the CB radio. "Follow me and stay close. I know these desert roads like the back of my hand." Eddie climbed into his Kenworth and fired up the engine. I was right behind him with Winston, and we pulled out of the trading post just as the two vehicles turned into the parking lot. In my mirror, I could see the men from the sedan getting out and running toward the well where we'd found the cash, but they were too late. We already had what we came for. Eddie led me onto a dirt road that I never would have noticed on my own. It looked like nothing more than a pair of tire tracks leading into the desert, but his Kenworth handled the rough terrain like it was built for it, and my Peterbilt followed close behind, bouncing and lurching over rocks and sand. Winston seemed to enjoy the wild ride, standing with his front paws on the dashboard and watching the desert landscape fly by. "Big Eddie to Road Dog," Eddie's voice came through the CB radio. "You copy?" I grabbed the microphone. "Road Dog here, Big Eddie. Where are we headed?" "There's an old mining road that connects back to Route 66 about 15 miles east of here. It'll add some time to your trip, but it'll keep you away from Richard's boys until you can get to the third cache." The mining road was even rougher than the first dirt track, winding through rocky hills and dry creek beds that probably hadn't seen water in decades. But it was also beautiful in its own harsh way. Red rock formations jutting up from the desert floor, ancient petroglyphs carved into cliff faces, and a sky so blue it almost hurt to look at. After about an hour of bone-jarring driving, we emerged back onto Route 66 near a small town called Moriarty. Eddie pulled over at a truck stop and I parked beside him. When we climbed down from our cabs, he was grinning like a man who'd just won the lottery. "That was fun," he said, slapping me on the back. "Haven't had that much excitement since I outran a tornado in Kansas last year." "Eddie," I said, "I need to ask you something. Why are you helping me? What did Theodore Blackwood mean to you?" Eddie's expression grew serious. "Theodore saved my life about 5 years ago. I was hauling a load through Albuquerque when I witnessed a hit-and-run accident. The driver who caused it was connected to some very bad people, and when I tried to report it to the police, I found out they were on his payroll. Theodore was the only investigator willing to take the case, and he helped me get the evidence to the FBI. The bad guys went to prison and I got to keep breathing." He looked at Winston, who was drinking water from a bowl Eddie had produced from his truck. "When Theodore called me 6 months ago and told me about his plan, I didn't hesitate. He said he was dying and needed to make sure his nephew didn't get away with murder. How could I say no to a man who'd saved my life?" The CB radio crackled to life with Silver Fox's voice. "Big Eddie, this is Silver Fox. Those black vehicles are still searching the area around Desert Rose, but they haven't figured out which way you went. You should have a clear run to the next location." "Copy that, Silver Fox." "Road Dog, you ready to keep moving?" I looked at my watch. It was almost 4 p.m. and I still had to make my delivery in Flagstaff by 6, but I was committed now, and there was no turning back. "Let's do it, Big Eddie. Where's the third cache?" Eddie pulled out Theodore's map and pointed to a location marked with a picture of a giant arrow. "Meteor Crater Road, about 40 miles east of Flagstaff. There's a big concrete arrow that was built in the 1920s to guide airmail pilots." Theodore hid the cache right at the base of it. We climbed back into our trucks and pulled back onto Route 66, Eddie leading the way and me following with Winston. The desert was starting to change as we headed west. More trees, different rock formations, and mountains visible in the distance. We were getting close to Arizona, and according to Theodore's map, the final 2 caches were both in Flagstaff itself. The concrete arrow was exactly where Eddie said it would be. A massive concrete structure pointing west toward California, built back when pilots navigated by following landmarks on the ground. It was an impressive sight, rising from the desert like some kind of ancient monument, and Winston immediately started getting excited when he saw it. We pulled off the highway and parked near the base of the arrow. This cache was harder to find than the first 2. Winston had to search for almost 10 minutes before he located the right spot, about 20 yards from the arrow's base near a cluster of desert shrubs. When we dug it up, we found the biggest container yet, about the size of a small suitcase. Inside were more documents, more money, and something new, a detailed map of Flagstaff showing the locations of the final 2 caches. But there was also a letter from Theodore, written specifically for whoever made it this far in the treasure hunt. "If you're reading this," the letter said, "you've successfully retrieved 3 of the 5 evidence caches, and you've probably figured out that this isn't just about money. Richard Blackwood murdered my brother David in cold blood, made it look like an accident, and then systematically stole the $20 million inheritance that was supposed to go to David's daughter, Maria Santos. The letter went on to explain that Maria was currently in hiding, afraid for her life because she'd witnessed Richard disposing of evidence related to her father's murder. The fourth cache contains proof of the murder, photographs and audio recordings that will put Richard away forever. But the fifth cache contains something even more important: the location where Maria is hiding, and the key to a safe deposit box containing the original will that proves she's the rightful heir. Eddie whistled low as he read over my shoulder. This is bigger than I thought, Marcus. We're not just collecting evidence, we're trying to save someone's life. I looked at Winston, who was sitting patiently beside us, panting in the afternoon heat. How does the dog fit into all this? How does he know where Maria is hiding? The letter answered that question too. Winston belonged to Maria before she went into hiding. He knows her scent, and he's been trained to find her no matter where she is. When you reach the final cache in Flagstaff, Winston will be able to lead you directly to Maria's location. The CB radio crackled with Silver Fox's voice again. Big Eddie, Road Dog, you've got company coming. 2 black vehicles just passed me heading west on Route 66, moving fast. They'll be at your location in about 15 minutes. Eddie and I looked at each other, then started throwing the cache contents back into the container. Time to move, Eddie said. The fourth cache is at the Flagstaff train station, and the fifth one is at the Lowell Observatory. We can hit both of them and find Maria before Richard's men figure out where we went. We climbed back into our trucks and headed west toward Flagstaff, the mountains getting larger and more imposing as we drove. Winston was getting more excited with each mile, standing up in his seat and whining softly like he could sense that we were getting close to something important. The Flagstaff train station was a beautiful old building from the early 1900s, built from local stone, and designed to handle the thousands of travelers who passed through on their way to California. The fourth cache was hidden in a maintenance shed behind the station, and it contained exactly what Theodore's letter had promised: photographs of Richard Blackwood